Fantasy TV in the 1980s didn't look anything like it does today. Before massive budgets and cinematic visuals, these shows relied on creativity, atmosphere, and some very bold ideas. Some of them stuck around in pop culture, but plenty have been left behind over the years. So today we're revisiting a collection of 80s fantasy shows that time mostly forgot, from quirky sitcoms to darker, more atmospheric series. We'll be going in chronological order, starting with the earliest releases and moving through the decade. Because once you start looking back, there are a lot more of these than you might expect. Fairy Tale Theater. Fairy Tale Theater was one of the most charmingly ambitious fantasy projects of the 1980s. Created and hosted by Shelley Duvall, the series brought classic fairy tales to life with a surprising twist, major Hollywood stars fully committing to these whimsical theatrical retellings. Each episode adapted a different story, often leaning into humor, stylized sets, and a slightly offbeat tone that made everything feel just a little magical. What made the show stand out was its willingness to treat fairy tales as both playful and sincere. It felt like a storybook come to life, and for many viewers, it became a defining piece of childhood fantasy television. Wizards and Warriors. Wizards and Warriors tried to bring high fantasy to network television. Set in a medieval world of rival kingdoms, magic users, and royal intrigue, the series leaned into a tone that was equal parts adventure and comedy. It followed the conflict between the noble house of Camarand and the villainous forces of evil sorcerers and scheming nobles. Part of its charm came from its willingness to embrace fantasy tropes without taking itself too seriously. Unfortunately, its ambitious concept didn't quite connect with a wide audience at the time, and it disappeared quickly. But it remains an early example of TV experimenting with full-scale fantasy worlds. Manimal. Manimal is one of those shows that feels almost surreal in hindsight. The premise followed Dr. Jonathan Chase, a man who possessed the ability to transform into any animal he chose, using that power to fight crime. Yes, it's exactly as wild as it sounds. The show leaned heavily on its transformation sequences, which were impressive for the time, even if they slowed the pacing to a crawl. It didn't last long, but its bizarre premise has kept it alive in pop culture memory as one of the strangest ideas ever put on television. Jennifer Slept Here. Jennifer Slept Here took a classic sitcom setup and gave it a supernatural twist. The series followed a family who moved into a house once owned by a glamorous movie star, only to discover that her ghost still lived there. That ghost, Jennifer, wasn't exactly subtle either, frequently interacting with the teenage son of the family and guiding him through life in her own sarcastic, larger-than-life way. The show blended comedy with light fantasy, creating a tone that felt playful rather than eerie. It may not have lasted long, but it captured a very specific kind of 80s supernatural charm. Down to Earth. Down to Earth flipped the typical guardian angel concept on its head by following an angel who had to earn her wings by helping a struggling family. Rather than presenting her as all-knowing or perfect, the show leaned into her learning curve as she navigated human life with a mix of curiosity and occasional confusion. This gave the series a warm, character-driven feel, blending light fantasy with heartfelt family storytelling. While it never became a major hit, it stood out for its sincerity and its gentle approach to fantasy, focusing less on spectacle and more on personal growth and connection. Robin of Sherwood. Robin of Sherwood brought a darker, more mystical edge to the classic Robin Hood legend. While it still followed the familiar story of an outlaw fighting injustice, the series leaned heavily into folklore and pagan mythology, introducing supernatural elements that gave it a unique identity. The forest itself felt alive, and the presence of mystical forces added a layer of depth to the narrative. Combined with strong performances and a memorable soundtrack, it created a version of the Robin Hood story that felt grounded, haunting, and distinctly different from the more traditional heroic interpretations audiences were used to. Highway to Heaven. Highway to Heaven blended fantasy with heartfelt drama in a way that made it stand out during the 1980s. The series followed an angel sent to Earth to help people in need, traveling from town to town with his human companion. Each episode focused on a different story, often tackling emotional or moral dilemmas with a hopeful, uplifting tone. The fantasy elements were subtle, serving more as a framework for human stories than the main attraction. It became a comforting presence for many viewers, proving that fantasy on television didn't always need grand worlds or effects to leave a lasting impression. The Little Vampire. The Little Vampire offered a more family-friendly take on classic vampire lore, focusing on the friendship between a young boy and a centuries-old vampire child. Rather than leaning into horror, the show emphasized adventure, humor, and the challenges of fitting in, even if you happen to be undead. The contrast between the human world and the vampire family created plenty of lighthearted conflict, while still exploring themes of belonging and identity. It wasn't about fear or darkness, but about connection and curiosity, making it a unique entry in the genre and a nostalgic favorite for younger audiences at the time. The Charmings. The Charmings took a familiar fairy tale idea and flipped it into a fish-out-of-water sitcom. The series followed Snow White, Prince Charming, and their family after they were magically transported into modern-day suburban America. Watching classic fairy tale characters try to navigate everyday life created plenty of comedic moments, from culture clashes to misunderstandings about how the modern world worked. It didn't aim for epic storytelling, instead focusing on light, character-driven humor. And while it lasted only 2 seasons, it remains a fun example of how flexible fairy tale storytelling can be when placed in a completely different setting. Werewolf. Werewolf took a much darker approach to fantasy television than many of its contemporaries. The series followed a man cursed to transform into a werewolf, forced to hunt down the one who passed the curse onto him in order to break it. This gave the show an ongoing narrative structure, something relatively uncommon at the time, as the story progressed episode by episode. Its tone was gritty and intense, leaning more into horror than light fantasy, and the practical effects and atmosphere added to its appeal. Though short-lived, it developed a cult following for its ambition and darker storytelling. Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast reimagined the classic fairy tale as a romantic fantasy drama set in modern-day New York. The series centered on the relationship between Catherine, a district attorney, and Vincent, a mysterious man living in the hidden tunnels beneath the city. The show explored themes of love, identity, and belonging, creating a tone that felt more poetic than typical television fare. Its unique setting and strong performances helped it build a dedicated fan base. Even years later, it's remembered as one of the most distinctive fantasy series of the decade. Honorable mentions. Before we wrap up, there are a few more 80s fantasy shows that deserve a quick mention. Anthology series like Amazing Stories and Tales from the Dark Side kept the genre alive with standalone tales that ranged from whimsical to unsettling. The Hitchhiker leaned into darker, more mature storytelling, while Monsters delivered creature-driven stories with a mix of horror and dark humor. And then there's The Storyteller, a visually rich series that brought European folk tales to life with a unique narrative style and unforgettable puppetry. Friday the 13th, the series. Despite its name, Friday the 13th, the series, had very little to do with the film franchise. Instead, it followed 2 cousins tasked with tracking down cursed antiques that carried supernatural powers, each object bringing danger to whoever possessed it. This gave the show a unique structure, with each episode centered around a different item and its consequences. The series leaned into horror and fantasy equally, creating a darker tone than many shows of the time. It may not have been what audiences expected from the title, but it carved out its own identity as a distinctive supernatural series. So those were some of the best forgotten 80s fantasy shows. If there's another deep-cut fantasy series from the decade that deserves a mention, feel free to drop it in the comments. You can find more fantasy TV deep dives over at tvshowpilot.com, and subscribe to the TV Show Pilot channel for more videos exploring the shows that slip through the cracks.